He was a youth with the face of a radiant moon and a mind so sharp that the Prophet declared him the most learned of all men in Halal and Haram. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into the incredibly cinematic life of a young man who literally built the foundations of Islamic law. We are talking about a figure whose intellectual legacy is so massive, its ripples are still deeply felt in jurisprudence today. But as you'll see, what makes his story truly captivating isn't just his cowering intellect, it's the intense devotion, the heartbreak, and the ultimate sacrifice of his incredibly short life. Let's jump right in. Historical sources paint a picture of someone who was just strikingly handsome. He had these dark, graceful eyes, pearly white teeth, a sweet voice, and a face that people frequently compared to a radiant moon. Whenever people looked at him, they were immediately struck by his peacefulness and his deeply devout demeanor. But beneath that striking exterior, an absolute intellectual powerhouse. The Prophet Muhammad actually declared him the single most learned of his entire nation when it came to understanding exactly what is permissible and what is forbidden, halal and haram. So, where does his story actually begin? Well, Muadh was a young man from Madinah, from the Khazraj tribe, and he was among the very first 70 individuals to pledge their allegiance to Islam at Aqaba. Now, while a lot of other youths his age were naturally focused on, building their worldly lives, maybe getting into trade or commerce, Muadh took a completely different path. His heart became an absolute vessel for the Quran. He was so completely immersed in the revelation that he became one of only 4 people from whom the entire world was explicitly instructed to learn the holy text. Section 1. The Logic of Ijtihad, Building the Foundations of Jurisprudence. When the Prophet commissioned Muadh to be the governor of Yemen, they had this truly historic back and forth. The Prophet asked him, "How will you judge when a matter comes to you?" And Muadh replied with this brilliant tripartite logic. First, he said he would judge by the Book of Allah. If the answer wasn't explicitly there, he'd move to step 2, the Sunnah, the traditions of the Prophet. But then the Prophet pushed him. What if he do not find it even there? And Muadh didn't miss a beat. He firmly replied, "Then I will exert my own opinion, ijtihad, to the best of my power." The sources tell us the Prophet smiled, actually placed his hand on Muadh's chest, and thanked Allah for giving him a messenger with such profound reasoning. And right there, that is the crucial concept, ijtihad. Now, to be clear, this isn't just making things up as you go along. It is a rigorous process of independent reasoning and critical thinking. Muadh's logic formed the very bedrock of critical thinking in Islamic law. It ensured that the religion wasn't just trapped in a rigid, static bubble. Because of this exact principle, the law could adapt. It meant justice could be applied to brand new, complex, and unforeseen situations across totally different times and cultures. It was a real game changer. Section 2. The Yemen Mission, Governing with Mercy and Temperance. Before Muadh even left for Yemen, he was handed some seriously profound leadership principles. He was told to introduce the faith gradually. The Prophet told him, "Make things easy, do not make them difficult. Give glad tidings, and do not repel people." He was essentially being instructed to be a gentle, cooperative guide, definitely not a dictator. He was also warned to practice strict temperance. Beware of luxury, for the servants of Allah do not live luxuriously. He was expected to actually live down among the people, understanding their daily struggles, not ruling them from some distant wealthy palace. And then, the Prophet gave him this ultimate, chilling warning about justice. Beware the supplication of the oppressed, for there is no screen between it and Allah. What you should really take away from this is the absolute, uncompromising standard of justice demanded of a leader. The sources highlight that this protection against tyranny applied to absolutely everyone, even non-believers. True justice meant Muadh had to fiercely protect the rights of all people under his governance, knowing that an oppressed person's plea goes straight to the Creator without any filter. Section 3. A Heartbreaking Farewell, Parting from the Beloved Master. As Muadh finally set off on his journey, the Prophet actually walked alongside his horse for a distance. I mean, really think about the gravity of that for a second. The leader of the entire community, the messenger himself, is walking on foot in the dirt while his young student rides. It was an incredibly rare and just visually striking display of immense respect. It really shows you the unbelievably deep, affectionate bond between the master and his prized student. And as they were moving along that shimmering desert road, the Prophet broke the silence with a prophecy that is just haunting. He looked up at the young man and said, "O Muadh, perhaps you shall not meet me again after this year." Just imagine the sheer weight of those words dropping on Muadh in that exact moment. The Prophet then finished his thought. Perhaps when you return, you shall see only my mosque and my grave. The sources describe how this absolute desolation just shook Muadh's soul. He began to weep openly. In that solitary desert heat, the young scholar realized with agonizing clarity that he was parting from his beloved teacher, his master, and his closest friend, for the very last time in this world. Section 4. The Final Sacrifice, the Trials of Syria, and the Plague of Amwas. So Muadh does return from Yemen, only to find that the heartbreaking prophecy had been fulfilled. The prophet had passed away. Later on, during the Caliphate of Omar, Muadh relocates to Syria as a highly revered teacher of fiqh, or jurisprudence. But then the Ta'un Amwas, the Great Plague, sweeps through the region. The governor of Syria, Abu Ubaidah, actually succumbs to the disease. The Caliph Omar immediately steps in and appoints Muadh to take supreme command of Syria. And as this plague is just ravaging the land, immense personal tragedy strikes. Muadh loses his beloved son, Abdurrahman. The sources tell us that their beautiful last words to each other were verses from the Quran, a father and son urging each other to be patient with Allah's decree. And then, at just 33 years old, the plague finally reached Muadh himself. But here's the thing. Even at that incredibly young age, his legacy was permanently secured. The Caliph Umar held him in such high regard that he later said if Muadh had lived, he would have appointed him as his successor to lead the entire Muslim nation. Why? Because the Prophet had promised that Muadh would be the Imam, the leader of all scholars on the Day of Judgment. He was a radiant star of knowledge, the undeniable master of Halal and Haram, who left an eternal mark on the intellectual tradition of the Ummah by an age where most of us are literally just figuring out our careers. I want to leave you with this final, powerful thought. When the plague took his health and he lay dying, he didn't flee, and he absolutely did not despair. He looked up and said, "O death, welcome. You are a long-awaited beloved." What an incredible, fearless way to face the end. And it leaves us with a really profound question. How can we live our lives and cultivate such an unbreakable certainty and inner peace that when our final moment comes, we greet it not with terror, but as a long-awaited friend? Think about that. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll catch you in the next one.